History Inside a Nutshell, the show where we sail into our port of call discussing maritime history. In today's video, we are going to be looking into something that you may not have heard of. And this story is about how a costly disaster nearly bankrupted a shipping company. What I researched, read and found was absolutely shocking. So without further ado, we are going to be opening this video with a very important question. How did the Titanic disaster nearly bankrupt the White Star Line?
On 15th April 1912, the RMS Titanic sank in the North Atlantic Ocean following a collision with an iceberg. Following the sinking, 1,500 lives were lost. This was not only a tragedy for the family members of the passengers and crew, but a disaster for the company that owned the Titanic, the White Star Line. White Star had already been in financial ruin by this point, and the sinking didn't help them when left, right and centre there had been a media frenzy, and the company had court cases that gave employees headaches. However, what people don't know is, following the disaster, White Star tried to settle losses on their insurance with another company you may have heard of. And no, we are not covering the switch theory between the Titanic and her sister ship, the Olympic. This topic will not be mentioned here because it's a myth, because there's no evidence or historical fact to back it up. We're only going to cover the facts in this video. But before we do so, we need to look at the history of the insurance company that gave White Star an insurance policy before the Titanic disaster. Also, we're going to be looking at court cases that have challenged White Star, leaving them to pay for the losses they were sued for. Let's begin with the basics. The insurance company that covered White Star Line's policies for their ships was Lloyd's of London, or Lloyd's. Lloyd's was founded in 1688, and for 300 years, the insurance company has become popular for shipping companies to turn to for marine insurance. In White Star's case, they had to deal with the ongoing pressures of sorting out coverage and losses that they were entitled to based on the requirements that Lloyd's made before making a final decision. So, considering all the complicated information White Star had to process, it's easy to see how much was lost following the sinking. The insurance story began in December 1911, when an act had been passed in the UK Parliament. This was called the National Insurance Act. It had been created as a national system of insurance to protect working people from loss of income if they are absent from work due to sickness or unemployed. The Act is split into two parts. The second part is the one that has the connection to the disaster, which we will get to later. Around the same time as the passing, White Star Line had completed 2 ships, with one about to prepare for her maiden voyage while the other was already in service. These 2 ships were the RMS Titanic and the Olympic. However, there was a problem with the Olympic. In September that year, the Olympic had a collision with a naval cruiser called the HMS Hawke. Following the collision, the Royal Navy sued White Star for surf damages, and although there is no fully known explanation for what happened, White Star was forced to pay in damages, but they tried to get an appeal to take the case to the appellate court. This had failed. It isn't known when it happened during or after the court trials following the collision, but White Star realised that they needed insurance if such an event happened again. White Star weren't worried about bankruptcy at this time, since with the construction on the sister ships and with a third on the way, the company built them out of their own profits and public bonds. Still, it was better to be safe than sorry. To obtain insurance, White Star needed someone to visit an insurance company on their behalf. Eventually, they found the person, and he was Wilfred Green. He was an employee for the broker company called Willis, Faber and Company. Willis, Faber and Company was White Star's client, and Green was given the task of seeking insurance for both the Titanic and the Olympic. From the communication between Lloyd's and White Star, Willis, Faber and Company had to provide a pitch to say why White Star want insurance from Lloyd's. Although the myth of the ships being unsinkable might be overrated, White Star said both ships were safe to sail, but if an event happened, there had to be a risk management program. To do this, the program had to include a comprehensive list of resources and drew up a policy to cover any damage or loss should either Olympic or the Titanic be lost. The policy had to cover the protection of the vessels during peacetime or war, their contents, engineering, mechanical faults, and public vulnerability risks. In January 1912, Lloyd's had agreed to deal with White Star. However, the company had been insured for half their value. Both the Titanic and, possibly, the Olympic cost around £1.5 million. But Lloyd's gave White Star £1 million in coverage and over £150 million to the hulls and machinery. On 15th of April, just 3 months later, Lloyd's received a telegram from Kate Brace about the Titanic. It was an anxious waiting game, especially when various reports came in. The truth was received at 1:27 p.m. London time on the same day. On the 16th, Titanic was entered into Lloyd's loss book. This loss book Lloyd's had kept was for serious losses should it affect their underwriters, a person who writes business through an association or facility at Lloyd's. Immediately after the disaster, Lloyd's had been trading with White Star in overdue insurance. However, White Star had bought a section of the risk management program called overdue insurance. This means when a ship is delayed in arriving at its destination, especially if it was lost overseas, White Star had to pay 60% more for its size than what it was covered in that section. Things got worse for White Star when the company had to face claims from people and other companies who have lost cargo and belongings. This included a 25 horsepower Renault, which belonged to a first-class passenger, William Carter, and an oil painting by artist Mary Joseph Blondel entitled La Circassière Maubin, a hand-bound poetry book decorated with 1,500 gemstones, 5 grand pianos, 1,500 bottles of wine, 50 cases of toothpaste, marmalade machines, and diamonds for the high-end store Tiffany & Co. The biggest problem they had to deal with was filing claims of negligence. There have been many filed claims that involve survivors and families of the dead. One was a life insurance claim from first-class passenger Marion Thayer, whose husband perished in the sinking. White Star had paid £31,000 in compensation, the largest amount of money for a life insurance claim at the time. Another claim came from the family of Patrick Ryan, whose family sued the company for damages over the death of Patrick. White Star fought back because, in a shocking twist of events, the company had a blanket disclaimer in which, over their policy, the disclaimer was printed on passenger tickets. It said, quote, "Neither the ship owner, agent, or passage broker shall be liable to any passenger carried under this contract for loss, damage, or delay to the passenger or his baggage arising from the act of God, public enemies, arrests or restraints of princes, rulers, or people, fire, collision, stranding, perils of the sea, rivers, or navigation of any kind, even though the loss, damage, or delay may have been caused or contributed to by the neglect or default of the ship owner's servants or other persons for whose acts he would otherwise be responsible." End quote. Patrick's family said that Patrick never read it when he issued one ticket between him and a friend he was travelling with. In addition, the court was in the family's favour when they said that the wording on passenger tickets was in contravention of British Board of Trade regulation. This proved that the disclaimer for negligence was worthless. Patrick's family won their case and received £100, equivalent to a year's wages at the time. However, there were times when White Star would take advantage of passengers, mainly third class, when the company's representatives got survivors to sign papers to keep them quiet. An example of this comes from the documentary The Wake of the Titanic. In one clip, the documentary shows representatives from White Star visiting St. Vincent's Hospital in New York. In the hospital, they went to see 3 third-class survivors who were still recovering. When meeting them, they asked the survivors to sign papers which said that the person who signed them agreed that they had settled with White Star for $25, despite how much belongings they had lost and their injuries. A representative said to survivor Annie Catherine Kelly that the $25 in payment was for her ticket to Chicago from New York City, when it was a hidden excuse to bribe Annie from making a file claim against White Star. Crew members, whether dead or alive, weren't lucky, and this is where we explain the National Insurance Act of 1911 in full detail. Earlier in the video, it is explained that the Act had been split into two parts. In the case of the Titanic disaster, only the second half was focused on. For families of crew members who have read the law to sue White Star, they would have pointed out that the Act states that workmen in insured trades like building construction and mechanical engineering were required to be insured. For each week during employment, the workers needed to contribute 2.5 pennies, and their bosses had to pay the same amount. If workers had insurance but they were unemployed, they would receive 7 shillings a week for up to 15 weeks. This last bit was focused on when payment stopped for crew members at midnight on 14th of April. And for 4 years there was no settlement. White Star never paid money for funerals for families too. In December 1915, White Star agreed to pay £567,251 in compensation, and they divided the money amongst survivors, which was about £811 per person. If the case happened in the 21st century, the owners of the White Star Line would be charged with criminal manslaughter. By 1915, White Star Line in total paid around £2.5 million to Titanic claimants, £2.2 million to British claimants, and £400,000 to American claimants. When White Star paid all claimants, the company was on the edge of bankruptcy. Despite this, and the retirement of the managing director, Bruce Ismay, White Star continued to run their ships, including the Olympic and the new ship, Britannic. However, sales were up and down between the end of the First World War and the 1930s. The company went out of business on New Year's Eve in 1949. To date, the sinking of the Titanic is considered one of the most costly disasters. But it has given companies and the public a valuable life lesson. Having any kind of insurance, whether it's life, car or ship, it's important to know if a person or company has the right protection insurance. However, having insurance can create losses too, especially if ships like the Titanic were lost at sea and carrying millions of pounds, euros, dollars, or any other money currency in cargo, goods, damages, wages and lives. The journey of Lloyd's and the Titanic was like a tempest, but it will never be forgotten.
I would like to thank my friend Barry of Airy Berry True Crime for narrating this week's video. Over on her channel, Barry has done loads of videos focusing on crime cases from past to present, and she has also done one video, a historical video in fact, of the gunpowder plot from last November. I have also had the privilege of being on Barry's channel to talk about 2 crime cases that were a mystery. If you would like to see them or have a look at any other of her videos on the channel, I will leave all links in the cards above and in the description box down below. If you enjoyed this week's episode, please subscribe for more historical content. Until next time, this has been History Inside a Nutshell, departing from the docks. Thank you so much for all of your support and enjoy the rest of your voyage.